Chiedo al professor Neri di presentare il guest ospite, la guest star. Grazie.
Complimenti, bravi. Bene, siamo quasi alla fine della giornata, però vi chiedo uno sforzo, che poi non sarà uno sforzo perché sarà un piacere straordinario seguire questa conferenza, questa mini conferenza. Il professor Dumas è forse quello che più al mondo ci ha informato, ha studiato sul test vibratorio. Io non so quanti di voi utilizzino il test vibratorio. Possiamo fare una prova. Chi utilizza il test vibratorio? Beh, non ha alzato la mano, benissimo. Beh, diciamo, non tanti però alla fine, sarà un 50%. Un 50% delle persone utilizza il test vibratorio, che invece è un test importantissimo. Il professor Dumas dell'Università della Lorena, mi sembra di ricordare, viene da Grenoble e io non mi dilungo tanto anche perché siamo stanchi e gli lascio il microfono ringraziandolo di essere venuto moltissimo, perché so che ti è costato, so che devi andare poi in America domani e quindi passando è venuto e ci ha fatto questo regalo. Grazie.
Grazie. Buonasera a tutti. Scusa, I try to speak English because my Italian is too poor. And I would like first to thank Professor Jean-Pierre Neri and the organizing committee to have proposed this presentation. It's a great honor and a great pleasure to be here in Chieti. My presentation will be very practical. I would like to present 10 good reasons to perform this test for the one who are not already convinced of its utility. And the skull vibration induced nystagmus test is a recent first-line examination test which we have developed in Grenoble during these 18 last years. And it was the object of a PhD thesis in 2014 in Nancy. And I will present it and insist on the main characteristics and the main results, which I will try to summarize at the end in 10 points as a take-home message. This presentation is very practical, conversely to the previous presentation, which was very brilliant and theoretical, which was an excellent presentation, physiology. It is a practical presentation. What is the skull vibration-induced nystagmus? Here is a lesion, a left lesion, total lesion, after temporal bone fracture, which occurred 10 years before, and either stimulation of the right or the left mastoid induces instantaneously a nystagmus beating away from the lesion side. It starts and stops with the stimulation and onset and offset of stimulation. It is repeatable and it is not modified by vestibular compensation. A short historical background. Von Békésy described or signaled in 1935 that vibrations applied to the skull could induce vestibular reflexes and induce motion illusions. But it is Luc in 1973 who first described the VIN incidentally in a patient who had a unilateral vestibular loss at 100 Hz. This has been confirmed and extended by a man in Germany and by our group in Grenoble since 19 1999, and since many other authors have described modifications of the VIN in different pathologies, as Lachner, Yagi, Popov, Stroop, Karlberg, Kuh, Cavaz, and in Italy, Park, and in Italy, Nuti, Modugno, Tanzaiello, Manzari. And we owe to physiologists, to young curators, expect to now understand better what we do on how to interpret this test. We have worked in Grenoble and in Nancy during these 18 last years to the location and frequency optimization in collaboration with the physics laboratory of the university campus, Professor Wedrogo. We studied the force pressure and the main characteristics of this test. I want now this evening to present this test essentially as a vestibular Weber test able to reveal a vestibular asymmetry at high frequencies. What is more precisely this test? I think that you have perhaps a sheet of paper with 10 points, and I will try to describe these 10 points at measure along my presentation. This test is a Weber test, and it reveals instantaneously a vestibular asymmetry for frequencies around 100 Hz. It stimulates bilaterally, bound conduction, and simultaneously both vestibules. In animals, curatoids demonstrated that at 500 Hz, it's mainly autolytic structures which are stimulated and mainly ultrahigh. Conversely, at 100 Hz, curatoids demonstrated that both canal and autolytic structures are stimulated. That's essential. And the nystagmus induced is the VIN, vibration-induced nystagmus, and is mainly observed at 100 Hz in common patients. Today, I will speak only about the skull vibration-induced nystagmus test. I will not speak of muscles stimulations, trapeze, cervical stimulations, which it's very different because the pathways are different and centers are different, and it is proprioceptive stimulation. How do such high frequencies stimulate both canal and autolytic structures? Since we know that for canal mechanism, the classical mechanism of the ampular crest mobilization is overtaken, and there is a cutoff frequency at 60 Hz. And I present this slide with curatoids permission, and curatoids suggested that for such high frequencies, it is the direct stimulation of by the liquid wave pressure on the hair bundle. Here is represented, there is an example of a tracheal macula, and here are the hair cells type 1, which are on the striatal part. And the type 1 hair cells have short and stiff hairs, which are very efficiently mobilized by these high frequencies. Conversely, in the extrastriatal zone, the type 2 hair cells have long hairs, which are flexuous and are less efficiently mobilized at such high frequencies. What is the technique? The patient in an upright sitting position, stimulus is 30 60 or more efficiently 100 Hz. Both mastoids are successively stimulated, and then vertex. And duration of stimulation is very short. Stimulation, very short examination, 5 to 10 seconds. What are the optimal frequencies and what is the optimal location of this test? That we have for the optimal frequency, we have studied 15 patients who had a common unilateral vestibular lesion, total vestibular lesion, and we stimulated them with the mini shaker BNK from 10 to 800 Hz. And we observed that the optimal frequencies in this severe unilateral vestibular lesion patient, severe unilateral vestibular loss page, was 100 Hz. This is different in anterior canal descent, and we will see it later. For the optimal location, we have also worked for the slow phase velocity in total unilateral vestibular lesions, and we have compared the slow phase velocity when stimulating vertex, mastoid, or cervical posterior in low part of the cervical part by vibrations. And we have worked also in normal patients, in normal subjects, with the physics laboratory of the ANSO3 of Professor Wedwargo with piezoelectric sensors to study the optimal location. And to summarize all these works, to short, the results in total or partial unilateral vestibular lesion or vestibular loss in patients with encased labyrinths and not in anterior canal descents. Things are different. The best topography is the mastoid. The slow phase velocity is significantly higher when stimulating mastoid than when stimulating cervical region on the low part and a vertex. And the optimal frequency in this population is 100 Hz, but excellent results or good responses may be observed between 60 and 120 Hz. That's, we have published it in diverse works. And how to interpret this test? What are the main clinical results? What can bring us to use more commonly this test in clinical practice? That is the results of our experience of these 18 last years in more than 19 and 800 patients, and 604 were recorded. We recorded 95 controls, 131 total unilateral vestibular loss, that is surgical patients who were operated on translabyrinthine approach for vestibular schwannoma, or 103 partial unilateral vestibular lesions, that is essentially vestibular neuritis, Meniere's disease, not operated schwannomas, and intratympanic gentamicin. 3 patients had total bilateral lesions, that is, they were operated on in the condition of neurofibromatosis type 2, and 36 had brainstem lesion and 56 labyrinthine malformations, essentially anterior canal descents. And this test is, there is no adverse effects in our experience, and a good tolerance. Recommendations are, one must be cautious in recently operated otosclerosis, and retinal detachment, recent cerebral hematoma, or anticurrent or poorly controlled antibiotherapy. What is the device, what kind of device to use? We commonly use this mechanical off-axis rotating vibrator, commercialized in France by Synapsis and in Italy by Inventis, which delivers frequencies from 30 to 100 Hz, 30, 60, 100 Hz, with an amplitude of 1 millimeter. I have seen in demonstrations of other vibrators by Euroclinic in this Congress. And there are other devices, electromagnetical devices by Amplifon, ESV1, and by North Coast Medical, NC 70209, but there are many others. We use now commonly since more than 1 year, since 1 or 2 years, the mini shaker to stimulate very high frequencies, which is very useful for anterior canal descenses, the use of high frequencies. And what is the results of such stimulation? How to retain positive nystagmus. The nystagmus starts and stops at stimulation. It is sustained, continuous. There is little or no habituation, and it is repeatable on both mastoids, and there is no secondary reversal. It is different from the head-checking test. And the slow phase velocity is usually higher than 2 degrees per second. This test is a global vestibular test. It simulates both canal and autolytic structures. But in clinical practice, we have good correlation with the horizontal canal results. Here is an example of a total unilateral vestibular loss, a transabdominal approach. And here is the recording of the right mastoid, left mastoid, and recording of the camera with camera on the right eye, left eye. This is successively examinations, and this is much reproducible. It starts and stops with stimulation. There is 3 components: horizontal, poor vertical, and a torsional component. And if we analyze the statistically different components, we did it in 46 patients. The horizontal component is observed in 98%, which suggests strongly that it is the horizontal canal which is essentially stimulated, but also the autolytic structure of the utricle. And the torsional component is observed in 70% and the vertical component 45%. The sensitivity was in total unilateral vestibular lesion 98. In this condition, nystagmus is always lesional nystagmus, always beating toward the safe side or away from the lesion side. In partial unilateral vestibular lesions, sensitivity is 76, and nystagmus beats toward the safe side in only 91% of cases. We have described it in a common article which we published with Courtois in Frontiers recently. And the specificity in 95 controls was 94. Most often there is no response. In a few cases, when there is a response, it is of very low slow phase velocity, or it is not reproducible. Or in a few cases of normal subjects, and mainly around 60 Hz stimulation, we may observe discordant results, a right nystagmus on the right mastoid, a left nystagmus on the left mastoid. This is inconsistent response, and this consistent response is negative. Most often there is no response. And here this test is not modified by vestibular compensation. Here is an example of a patient operated on 6 years before, and the stimulation induces, whatever the location, a nystagmus, lesional nystagmus beating toward the intact side. Same patient, 10 years later, same nystagmus. This is interesting in occupational medicine and in medical legal medicine. This test complements other vestibular tests as a first-line examination test in the vestibular multifrequential analysis. It explores high frequencies, 100 Hz. It's not physiological since natural movements are between 0.95 and 5 Hz. And it's very, for the VOR, it's very much higher than the caloric test, which explores 0.03 Hz, which can be explored by the Baronet test as a bedside examination test. But this frequency is much higher than head checking, 2 Hz, and VHIT. This frequency is very close to frequencies attributed to OVMP and CVMP, which are around 200 and 500 Hz. What is its usefulness in clinical practice? There is an example, practical example, of a patient who complained after a left complicated otitis, which recovered its hearing. He had dizziness, atypical dizziness, autolytic recurrent symptoms, and a normal caloric test. And he was considered, because he had normal examinations in between attacks periods, and he was considered as a malingerer. But explorations of other frequencies here by the head checking test here demonstrated a strong right beating nystagmus. Here is a slow phase velocity. And with the skull vibration-induced nystagmus in the different direction, left beating, here it starts and stops with the stimulation. Such discordant results are observed in 30% of our partial vestibular lesions in our experience. This patient was explored with MRI, and it demonstrated here an eye drops on the left side, vestibular eye drops. Things are more complicated in Meniere's disease. The test is positive in around 60% of cases. But in Meniere's disease, and I have already discussed it this morning with colleagues, the nystagmus is often of the irritative type, beating toward the lesion side in around 20 to 27% of cases following the papers in literature. And things are more complicated in Meniere's disease, since sometimes in 10% of cases, nystagmus at 30 Hz may show a response different at 100 Hz. This test is useful in the exploration of so-called or supposed bilateral vestibular reflexes. In true bilateral vestibular reflexes, of course, the caloric test is negative, even at 20 Hz. There are no responses at the rotatory test, and VHIT is modified for the 6 canals, and OVEMP and CVEMP are abolished. Conversely, the COR, the cervicocular reflex, is enhanced, and the skull vibration in this condition is negative. There is no response, no nystagmus. But in a few cases with forged bilateral reflexes, same results for the other examination, but the skull vibration-induced nystagmus test may be positive, confirming that the lesion is not complete and that at least on one side there are still remaining hair cells, type 1 hair cells responding at high frequencies. Here is such an example. Here is the patient who had myelodysplasic syndrome, and she was treated by antimitotics, and she presented Bika virus infection, meningoencephalitis. She had a bilateral abolition of the HIT response, 6 canals, no response caloric, no response at the rotatory test, and no responses at the CVEMP. Conversely, there is a strong nystagmus with the skull vibration-induced test, nystagmus test, beating toward the right, suggesting that there are still remaining cells responding on the right side at high frequencies. And the rehabilitation is often more easy in patients who are not totally differentiated. This test is an important point. This test acts as a vestibular Weber test. Here, in the example of a total unilateral vestibular lesions, the VIN always beats toward the safe side, whatever the stimulated side. And there is no statistical changing or modification if you stimulate the ipsilateral side or the contralateral side. There is no interaction, side and slow phase velocity. Here is an example, in this way, in case of bilateral lesions, there is no response. And in this case of partial unilateral vestibular lesion, this patient had a Ramsey-Hunt syndrome with here hypersignal meningoneuritis at the MRI, and this patient had compensated symptoms. He was no longer complaining of vertigo, but one could reveal instantaneously, yes, she had a head tilt with ocular tilt reaction associated. And head shaking test reveals instantaneously a lesional nystagmus beating toward the right, and the stimulation of the mastoid reveals also instantaneously a nystagmus, a lesional nystagmus beating toward the safe side. The stimulation vertex are less efficient as usually. Mastoid stimulation are very strong, efficient. But things are not that simple in a partial unilateral vestibular loss. And if we refer to literature, and in less severe unilateral vestibular loss, one may observe in a few cases that ipsilateral SVEM. For example, vestibular neuritis, most often, of course, nystagmus lesional beating toward the contralateral side, but in a few cases it is ipsilateral. And in vestibular neuritis, there are between 5 to 10% of patients who have ipsilateral sphin. In vestibular schwannoma, not operated schwannomas, this is between 0 for Lee to 26 for Modugno patients. In Meniere's disease, here the results are more correlated. Very often in Meniere's disease, there is a irritative nystagmus beating toward the lesion between 20 to 27% of cases. In intratympanic gentamicin treatment, that is the series of June, there were responding patients who were injected 7 times, and it is like in total vestibular lesions, but there are many intratympanic injections. And in BPPV, it's very rare. It's only observed in Lindsay-Monroe syndrome, associated with ipsilateral hypofunctioning vestibule and with caloric hypofunction. Yes, we have seen the common unilateral vestibular lesions. It's quite simple. But in anterior canal lesions, things are very different, and conversely, in contrast, what does happen in this lesion? I will show the video. This patient at the left, donc anterior canal lesions, caloric test is normal, and correlated VCVMP with low threshold and high amplitude. And this patient, it will work, yes, simulated on vertex, and this patient revealed instantaneously strong torsional and horizontal nystagmus beating toward the lesion. The vestibular Weber is the same on the same side as the audiological Weber. Now, in such patients, we are interested by the study of the very high frequencies, and we have observed that there is, after the works of Courtois, we have observed that these patients are responding to very high frequencies, up to 700 Hertz. That is observed in 65% of our patients, USCD patients. We have a paper under review with Courtois about this topic. And here is an example of such patient, small responses at 100 Hertz and higher responses at 300 and 400 Hertz. That is very different from common, usual unilateral vestibular lesions. Another example, 400, 500 Hertz, very strong responses on mastoids and vertex. And up to 700 Hertz, this patient responded, stimulation vertex, no stimulation, respond very high frequency. How to explain such results? And we hypothesized that there was a similar phenomenon to what has been described for the anterior labyrinths by Rozowski, Saunders, and Merchant, who described bone conduction facilitation toward the lesion side. And more recently, Courtois, I present this slide with his permission. Courtois demonstrated in artificially created anterior canal descents these results in posterior vestibule, posterior labyrinth vestibule. Here is the animal before the lesion, before the creation of the descents. And then in this case, there is no tuning curves, there is no phase-locked responses. Conversely, after creation here of a small anterior canal distance, these animals respond at very high frequency after air-conducted stimulation, and after bone conducted stimulation, very high frequencies up to 745 Hz. There is a facilitation toward high frequencies. To summarize our results, here we have studied 3 populations: normal, severe unilateral vestibular loss, common, severe unilateral, and dehiscences. And this paper is under review. And we stimulated from 10 to 800 Hz, and we analyzed the horizontal component, the vertical component, and the torsional component. And these patients were stimulated on mastoids and on vertex. And in controls, in normal subjects, there were poor responses and very rare responses. Conversely, in severe unilateral vestibular lesions, optimal responses are at 100 Hz and were mastoid stimulations, and there are very poor response for the vertical component, torsional component here. Conversely, in contrast, in unilateral anterior canal dehiscence, there is an extension of sensitivity toward high frequencies here, 500, 600, 400, 500 Hz, and optimal response are obtained on vertex here, and there is equal repartition for the horizontal, vertical, and torsional component. That is the rock test, but does not bring much more things. And to summarize our results, this test is essentially a vestibular Weber test in clinical practice. In normal subjects, the response on one side is cancelled by the stimulation, concomitant stimulation of the other side. And in case of symmetrical lesions, in normal and in symmetrical lesions, there is no nystagmus. In case of vestibular asymmetry, deficit, partial deficit, or more profound or more severe deficit, in case of hypersensitivity or hyperexcitability syndrome, as in the condition of anterior canal dehiscence, where the bone conduction, there is a bone conduction facilitation toward the lesion side, and in a few cases of Meniere's disease, mechanism is different. There is a nystagmus of irritative tip beating toward the lesion. Conversely, in deficit in unilateral vestibular loss with caloric hypofunction or with hypofunctioning disease, in translabyrinthine approach, in neuroma, not operated vestibular schwannomas, or in vestibular neuritis, or in intratympanic gentamicin, there is a nystagmus of lesional nystagmus beating toward the intact side. Is this test interesting for location of a lesion? Not too much, because it is the VOR which is explored, and its response for a lesion on in any point of the pathway, of the VOR pathway. Here it is a correlation with malformation. Here is a common cavity here. The horizontal canal is not existing on the right side, and we have a pure horizontal nystagmus beating toward the intact side, left curve. But in central diseases, there is the issue, the exit of the 8th spur of cranial pair, of cranial nerve, 8th cranial nerve. Here is very close to the nucleus, 8th nerve, 8th nucleus. And there was also a vibration-induced nystagmus through phase velocity. But this test is more specific, is more sensitive to reveal peripheral, is PUVL, than central brainstem lesions here, significantly more sensitive for peripheral lesions. And the take-home message, I hope I have not been too long, is that It is a bedside examination test. It is essentially a vestibular Weber test which shows instantaneously vestibular asymmetry. The optimal stimulus frequency is 100 Hz in patient with a UVL or lesion, a loss, with encased labyrinths and mastoid process. And the IN is positive when it beats toward the same direction after each mastoid and vertex stimulation. 3, there is no adverse effect in our experience and in the literature. It is a global vestibular test. Both canals at 100 Hz and otolith structures at 100 and 500 Hz are stimulated. The IN is a rapid test, not modified by vestibular compensation, and there is benefit or interest in occupational medicine, but also in medical interest. SFINT complements other vestibular test as a first-line bedside examination test in the vestibular multi-frequency evaluation. And in Meniere's disease, it is often of the irritative tip, 20 to 25% of cases, and in neuritis in the other peripheral unilateral vestibular or loss, neuritis, schwannomas, chemical labyrinthectomies, it is usually of the lesional tip beating toward the intact side in 76% of cases. Conversely, in contrast, in anterior canal descensus, the higher responses are obtained on vertex, and the horizontal component, on torsional component, beat toward the lesion. I thank you for your attention. Perhaps in Italian, I have. Same thing in Italian. Yes, possibly. Up, yes, perhaps a few, perhaps questions, but I had perhaps a few video to show the clinical interest, practical interest of this test, if you want, and if you are not too much tired, I can show them to you as you like. I can show. That it is Professor Schmerber, who has a large experience of cochlear implants in Grenoble, and who performed this test before and after implantation. That is the control he performed just after surgery.
The patient was operated on this morning with a Flex 28 and one-day surgery like we do since many years. This is the device, 100 Hertz, and we put the pressure on the mastoid, and as you can see, there is no induced nystagmus at few hours post-op.
This is a robust test, but which has the advantage to to show that very probably there has been no impairment, no damage to vestibular system, and in these cochlear implants, it's very frequent that there are no adverse effects on the vestibular partition. Here is long-lasting vestibular neuritis, and there was only this patient has instantaneously a nystagmus. Here is a vestibular schwannoma, left vestibular schwannoma, a small right beating nystagmus on the right mastoid, and here on the left mastoid also the same direction, right beating nystagmus. In schwannoma, the sensitivity of this test is around 71% in our experience, and we have in 10% of cases a nystagmus beating toward the lesion side, a very seldom. This was presented it was a series of 70 patients. It was presented in Los Angeles in 2011. And there is Meniere's disease. Things are very different. Here is a left Meniere's disease. No nystagmus at the head-checking test. No nystagmus. A normal VHIT as usually. And the vibration induces a nystagmus beating toward the lesion, irritative nystagmus. On vertex, there is no response on vertex, or very low response. Mastery is more efficient. Well, that is another case. Head-checking nystagmus, a partial vestibular lesion. Viral infection at the beginning, head-checking test beats toward the right, and it was unsteady. And the vibration-induced nystagmus reveals a contralateral nystagmus beating toward the left. Here in the recording, and this is observed in 30% of partial vestibular lesions following frequent. And here is a patient after labyrinthectomy, intratympanic gentamicin on the right for intractable Meniere's disease. Head-checking test positive. Lesional nystagmus beating toward the safe side. And the vibration-induced stimulation induces instantaneously lesional nystagmus, either on the left or on the right mastoid. Poor responses on the vertex. Just to hand, that is a patient who was activated 14 days after the surgery, implantation. It was activated, and stimulation of with the at 100 hertz. There is no sound, but I apologize. Stimulation of mastoid induces no nystagmus. There is no vestibular damage, which can be verified simply and rapidly to ensure the surgeon absence of damage. I thank you for your attention.
Ci sono domande per il professore? Io ho one question. 10% of healthy patients have a nystagmus irritated. No, right on the right side, left on the left side. Why?
I have discussed this point with Professor Courtois, and he hypothesized that there was, he found in animals doublets for small variation of frequency or location, and the formation of doublets, and doublets double action potential. And he hypothesized that this was a phenomenon which could explain this, and but I'm not sure. That's, I report what Professor Courtois hypothesized in this as a solution, possible solution.
Allora ringraziamo il professor Dumas per la grande cortesia, gentilezza, professionalità e quant'altro per essere venuto qua da noi. La giornata di oggi è finita, è già il congresso è appena cominciato, è già finito. One question by Manzari. Manzari ha studiato.
Yes, I studied a lot about. Thank you for your communication. But what's your idea about? And thank you for understanding that the semicircular canal dehiscence can produce vestibular induced nystagmus by vibration at 500 Hz and higher frequencies. what's your idea about the component in this type of lesion? Is mainly horizontal or vertical or torsional, and what is the contribution of every part of in your idea? Obviously, it's very difficult to do, to understand what this kind of nystagmus.
Yes, okay. Professor Manzari has much work also OVMP, CVMP, and high frequencies in anterior canal descenses, and his conclusion are close to the conclusion for the sensitivity to high frequencies in anterior canal descent, and with the research experiments and of Jan Courtois in animals. Yes, first. Second, to respond to your question, the essential component is torsional. We have a series now of more than 27 unilateral anterior canal descents and more than 13 bilateral anterior canal descents. And in bilateral cases, things are less clear-cut because this is a vestibular Weber and responses are very low in bilateral. But in unilateral vestibular lesions, we have three kinds of response. 40% of patients have primarily torsional components. 30% of patients have primarily horizontal components, beating toward the lesion side. And 30% of patients have vertical component, primarily vertical component, more often in our series upbeating than downbeating. But White and others described downbeating components, and we observed it in more than 20% of cases. That's the reason. And what's interesting and what I discussed with Jan Courtois recently is at such high frequencies, we have responses extended toward 500 Hz. What is stimulated? Are that still the canals? Or are there both canal and autolytic structures? Or are there only autolytic structures? Or mainly autolytic structures? And what is interesting in this possibly interesting, this statistical study, is that to bring arguments for autolytic structure stimulation and ultra-echo stimulation, it is that we have equal components in anterior canal descent for vertical, horizontal, and torsional in slow phase velocity. And that kind of responses with three components, it's often utricular, as it has been described by Suzuki and the team of Suzuki.
So the utricle can produce nystagmus?
Yeah, thank you.
Ok. Grazie a tutti. Domani mattina tutti puntuali alle 8:30, alle 9? 9 meno un quarto? 8:30.